Music Matters. Kyla. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. What were you just talking about? You said you have like your original notebook that you were first doing interviews on?
Well, I was saying that I should have brought it with me because the conversation that we were having earlier was revolving around mementos that we collected when we were younger and first started doing the things that we love the most. And I have this one. It's like the fucking like composition notebook, and it's completely
like
covered
this.
Like that one. It looks exactly like that, and it's just covered in like this thick layer of stickers from all of these bands that I saw, all of these people that I met in the local scene, and it has the very first iterations for Pure Nowhere for my magazine, the very first interviews that I ever did. We used to when I was younger, I got into music going to my first local concert at Soma San Diego. And then we became friends with the women who ran that, and so they would let us in early and they would give us photo passes to everything. And like unlimited access to whatever we wanted. And so we would interview bands on like the green electrical box behind the venue.
That's such like iconic like locate like that's so funny.
It was beautiful, and so it just has it has so many beautiful mementos taped in, because like interviews that I would do on the back of napkins when I would forget my notebook, and I have it all audio recorded too, saved somewhere in the remnants of Google. But
isn't it beautiful to have like those physical things too? Like I think about it all the time. There's like a framed picture over there, and it's the first time I ever wrote the words above the bridge down. And it's so I was taking like a PSAT when I was I guess I would have been like a sophomore in high school at this time, towards like the end of the year, and I was like kicking around the idea for Above the Bridge in my head. I didn't know like what it was, what I wanted it to be, but I was kicking around ideas in my brain, and I was trying to figure out like a name, and I'm very drawn to like the way that words look. You know, like I think like there's what the word says and there's how the word looks, and like the way that a word looks, I think, can sometimes evoke as much as the word is actually, you know, what the word means. So like writing Above the Bridge, I don't know, something about the way that the three words like jammed into one, I was super attracted to. But like the first time I ever wrote it down is on that piece of paper over there, which is like scratch paper for my PSAT while I was taking it. I was like supposed to be taking the test, but I was just thinking about it. But it's like having like physical things like that, I think, is sometimes almost as beautiful as the memories themselves, you know? When you look back at the time like that, so you were how old when you were going to Soma and like trying to do these interviews, and then how did you first meet the women that were running the spot? Well,
I first started building my website when I was in 8th grade, so when I was about 14 years old. It took me 2 years to be satisfied with how it looked, how like, you know, the final form of existence. And then I started taking it more seriously my freshman year of high school when I went to my first local concert. That was for my 15th birthday.
Do you remember what that show was? Like who the bands were?
I still have the flyer actually. The bands.
So cool.
I'm really good friends with the band, or at least I was really good friends. I'm sure we're friendly acquaintances now, but haven't talked to them in a while. But they came and plastered posters for the event all over my high school.
Wow.
It was the Snikes and Bash Dogs and False Puppet, and I don't know if any of those bands exist anymore. The Snikes definitely don't. Bash Dogs maybe, but it was a beautiful, wonderful show, and I remember just being so enthralled because I had no clue that this incredible community existed right down the street from my high school. And I had really, really bad social anxiety as a kid, so I didn't really have any friends in school, or I did, and not necessarily in like you know, you're friends with kids because you're in the same class kind of way. And so I remember going to this show and just looking at everybody there and being like, you know, this is who I want to be. Like, these people are who I want to surround myself with. This is the space that I want to create as my own. It was really lovely. I remember sitting out front and watching some people meet up with the bands in the parking lot and then go around the back of the venue and being like a little like freshly 15-year-old and being like, oh my gosh. And that was still to this day the greatest show I've ever been to.
Wow.
I remember the room was so packed that everybody was dancing and moving around, and I was like lifted off the ground without even having to jump because it was just like a tin of sardines. But yeah.
What do you think it was like in those early days that attracted you to like that group of people? Because it's interesting. Like I feel like when I first got into like scene music, I was very just in love with like the music aspect of it. But a lot of people I've talked to have said the same thing that you were just saying, like how they really attracted and drawn to like that scene. Like, do you think it just was like the community aspect of it? Like, what of it do you think was the first thing that kind of like brought you in?
I think it was the first place I had ever found that felt like home in a very like visceral and true kind of way. I think it was the first place I had ever been that wasn't difficult to exist in, because you already had something very deeply in common with everybody in attendance, which was the music.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, deeper bonds have been built from things like that. So walking up to a stranger at a concert felt like really nothing, you know, but walking up to a stranger in the rest of the world felt like something deeply terrifying.
Interesting.
So I loved that, and I when that happened, I knew that I never really wanted to let that go.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think shows still feel that way to you? Like, you kind of have that common thread, like that link, so it's just easier to make friends?
I think I haven't thought about that, really. I mean, I think shows definitely feel different. They don't feel as magical as they did when I was younger.
I know
they
the
don't
feeling,
feel as
yeah.
I'm not too sure. I think I have to think on that question.
I've tried to like get to a place where I could like recreate that magic in my head, and sometimes I question like, is there a way to get back to it? Because I still love shows. I go to so many shows, and a lot of them, you know, it's different now, because a lot of them are like my friends, or a lot of them I'm like, you know, people I've met or whatever. I find myself not going to as many shows as like a pure fan, maybe. And I think that might be part of what I'm trying to get back to right now, like trying to like I don't remember who I was talking to, but when I was in the Bay Area over the past break, I like fell in love with the Backseat Lovers. I don't know why. I had like never really gotten into their music, and when I was back over break, I was like their new album was all I listened to. It was the new Backseat Lovers album, and it was like I was telling a friend of mine, I was like, I can't remember the last time I've like fallen in love with the band. And I was like, I missed that feeling, you know, like to deeply get so involved and enthralled by like anything that a band does.
I think that's really beautiful, and that's something where like, I mean, I used to go to at least one concert every single week.
Yeah.
You know, that was for like years. That was what I did. That was where I existed. I would go alone, and I would go and I would know everybody, and it was just like a beautiful sacred place. And there was a long period of time where I didn't think I was going to be able to go to shows at all again, because when my health stuff happened, I mean, one of my chronic illnesses makes me extremely sensitive to loud noises, crowds, flashing lights, and I can't regulate body temperature. So like, you know how warm it gets inside of a concert venue.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stand for long periods of time. I couldn't stand at all, period, for many months. So that was something which was very interesting, because shows were always like the biggest part of my identity and the thing that the place where I was the most happiest. And then sort of realizing this was all happening during COVID too. So obviously like shows weren't really going on at that time. But believing for so long that was never a space that I could exist in again, and that I would have to sort of find other ways to exist in the world was really interesting. I do think that was really helpful, because I have sort of been able to deconstruct what I loved the most about local concerts and sort of weave that into different aspects of my life, which I feel like makes me feel more fulfilled and more joyous on a very sustainable level.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do you think that level of joy is like equivalent? Or do you think there's ways to recreate it, kind of like recreating the whatever they would call that, like recreating the feeling that you would get when you go to these local shows and be part of this community? Like, have you been able to fully find it in other things?
I think that because of the context with which I went into my really early local shows, I don't think anything else will ever match up to that. But that is to say, I do sort of mark that as like the turning point in my life, to which when I truly became myself for the first time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like every single evolution of myself after that has just sort of been evolving on top of the foundation that was built in those early experiences.
Interesting. Yeah, changing as a person, I think, is so strange when the thing that... Because I feel a similar way. And it's strange when I think the thing that brought you of age, like one of the biggest, like most shaping experiences or things or places that you were like as a kid, as a younger person, that thing isn't the same, but you grow. You know what I'm trying to say? Like it's like, I feel very similarly, I think, with like some of the Bay Area music scene I was involved with when I was like younger. It's like that scene isn't really there anymore. And I think it's a really strange and like hard to describe, like almost like bittersweet feeling, because it's like you don't want, you know, like on one hand I want to be like grateful for the memories and the nostalgia is beautiful, but it's also very difficult sometimes to not wish that was still a thing, you know? Like you get cut in this middle place where it's like, I don't want to go back, but I kind of wish it existed, you know?
I cannot tell you how deeply I relate to this, especially because, the San Diego local scene, I mean, like one reason why I feel like concerts don't really exist as that magical space for me as in depth as before is because it's just not the same, you know? Post-COVID, I'm sure everybody can agree that it's just not the same, but specifically for San Diego local music in 2020, there was a very big reckoning for a lot of the larger people in the music scene, the people who were headlining the shows and throwing the shows. And I feel like, at least in my experience, from what I found, San Diego has had the most intense sort of restructuring in terms of sexual assault and everything under that realm. That was something that definitely, I mean, there were 2 or 3 different waves where it comes out that all of the bands that everybody knew and loved that were creating these what we assumed as beautiful safe spaces with incredible memories were horrible people. And then the scene would collapse and everybody would be like, well, what do we do now? There's nobody throwing the shows, there's nobody playing the shows. Like, these are the bands that the smaller local acts would model their sound after.
Wow.
And then after after all of the trauma would arise, sort of where do you pick up and go from there? And I remember the second time around, the rebrand of the local scene was that, it's safe and it's inclusive and we're finally like prioritizing these things and we're talking about it. And then it happens again. And at that point you're like, okay, well, like, who do you trust? And who is somebody that is,
wow.
I don't know, I feel like you just asked for the bare minimum there. And it was an era of time where it is that very bittersweet feeling of the scene that raised me, that brought me up into the world that I'm in now. 95% of those bands don't exist anymore because they ended up being really horrible, shitty people. So simultaneously, like, holding those beautiful memories and like wanting to appreciate the impact that had, while also leaving space for the permanent trauma and damage that was instilled there, and knowing that it can never exist again is a really interesting sort of mental loop. I've talked with a lot of my friends from the San Diego scene about that, and it's a sentiment that kind of is shared across the board.
Is it almost like you look back at those memories with an asterisk, like they're just in like a different context, and did you think that does it make the memories feel different? Does it make them feel like almost like you shouldn't have them? Like, does it kind of like put a bad taste on the nostalgia? Like, how do you look back and reconcile with the fact that, like, although in the moment all these things seemed amazing, what turned out, to be under the surface was that a lot of these things were happening and there's a lot of terrible things happening. Like, when you look back at it, are you able to separate the fact that, there were happy memories and then there's, unfortunately what happened, but can you separate the two?
I think I don't think I will ever be able to separate them, but I think that
that's tough.
Sitting with it long enough and going over those feelings and those memories and talking about it with other people who, sat there for the same experiences, I think you get to a point where you sort of hold space for both of them. There's not necessarily a separation, but like you can't remove context from experience, and I think that unfortunately the darker side of those experiences just add even deeper to the context, because like, I don't know, I remember being 16 and it was just something something normal where you go to the shows, you're a young girl, you don't go to the back of the venue without someone, because there's always going to be the creepy guys there. And that was something that was so normal to me as a kid. And I remember I went to my first music festival when I was 16. I went to the Growler 6. And of course, if you're familiar with any of the accusations that arose with the Growlers, that was not a very good time for me and my friend that I was with. And then I remember, I was 16, so that was maybe like 2017. And then 2020 comes around and all of the accusations start arising, and you start sort of remembering things in a very different light, very different context. And then piecing things together and then talking with other people. And then it turned out that a friend of mine from San Diego, a very close friend of mine, had the same interaction with the Growlers in their circle as my friend and I did, except 3 years after ours had happened. which then just sort of, you start to, the thread starts to get a bit tighter and everything starts to get a bit closer woven. And I think that context is always there, whether you realize it or not, And
I'm sure it's very, very difficult to like look back at that and have the happy memories exist as simply happy memories. I'm sorry that that's like the way that was tainted, and it sucks that local scene, just everything that happened with it seems like it so deeply, obviously, affected so many people, and especially so many of the kids that came up with that scene were so young. It's almost like having your childhood like ripped away in a really, really terrible way.
Yeah, I remember this was actually with one of the Growlers people, one of their really close friends. I remember my friend and I got brought backstage during the festival, and we were like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, so exciting. And I remember at one point this guy is talking to us, and he asked us like, oh, how old are you? And I go, oh, we're 16. And he looks at me and he goes, without a beat, goes, no, you're not. You're 18. I was at your birthday last week, remember? And that obviously...
In the moment, that meant nothing to you, but then time and time on, you're like, whoa.
No, in the moment, it meant panic.
Oh, okay. So okay. Oh, I thought you were saying that like you looked back and realized how, okay.
No, that was just that individual experience. It not necessarily panic, but in like like that feels kind of creepy. Like, let's just get away from this kind of vibe. Like, not necessarily like deeply phased, because obviously those comments had been said before, but in the context of that situation, it was much deeper, and there was a lot of other stuff that happened at that festival that was not necessarily super lovely to experience, but until the accusations came out, that was something, like, that whole weekend was something that I held in my head as, like, this beautiful magical experience. My friend and I got to go up on stage with the band while they're performing. It's like this huge, you could just see the expanse of people all the way back. And I mean, you're 16 years old, and one of your favorite bands, they're telling you, oh my god, like, we're so glad we met you guys, and
it's like superheroes.
This is it was exciting, it was fun. It was fun. And then when context comes out and you start to examine your own experiences in context, you also start to remember things that you didn't let yourself remember beforehand. And I think that, like, that is like a nice summary of the overall experience with the scene as well, is like, it's beautiful and lovely, and then the context sort of gets peeled back, and then you start to realize things that you didn't realize, but that you didn't let yourself realize.
To not dig too deep into it, but to kind of look at it in the future tense, how do you think, not only that scene, but scenes in general, like scene-based music, and as it evolves, how do you think we get to a place where those things are easier to avoid? Like, how do you think we get to a place where, like, we can exist in, like, gigantic communities of like-minded people, where idolism is at a certain degree inevitable, unfortunately, when you have like a fan to musician dynamic or a fan to artist dynamic, there's just idolism that it's very hard to have that not exist. How do you think we move to a place where that can exist in a healthy manner, and we can create spaces and scenes for kids to go see music that are safe, and like we ensure that everything is safe and people are being taken care of?
I mean, I think that when you start to ask questions like that, you get really deep into like an abolitionist sort of mindset, where a lot of these things are, like, a lot of the issues that we have are instilled in the foundations that house these problems. For sure. And to dream about a world where those don't exist involve taking down that entire system and rebuilding it from the ground up. And I think that with where we are right now, unfortunately, maybe I'm just being jaded, I don't necessarily see a future where those issues don't exist, because at the end of the day, you can't, control every person. But I think that creating a safe space, at least to the best degree that we possibly can, is about making the tools for safety much more accessible, much more widespread, much more talked about. And like you said, like, idolization, unfortunately, in the world that we live in, will always exist. I'm not really too sure what to do about that in that realm, especially with the rise of social media and TikTok and everything. It's so much easier to create this amassed persona for people that you admire. I feel like idolism has gone to completely new metrics now than it did beforehand.
What do they call it? I think it's parasocial relationships.
Precisely.
Yeah, where it's like you look at somebody who you don't really know, but you feel like, either via the internet or via the content they put out, you feel like you're their friend. You feel like you know them.
And see, that's the thing, is that didn't exist before. You had these celebrities and you sort of like, you wondered what they were like, and you like created personas for them in your head because you couldn't get to know them. And that was part of the allure, was that you couldn't get to know these people.
For sure.
So they were like mysterious and untouchable and, blah, blah, blah. But now with social media, everybody thinks that they know everybody so well, when that really isn't the case.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm not really too sure where that goes, but I do think about that from time to time and sort of wonder the societal impacts on what that will, create.
I have a friend who I taught, like a very dear friend of mine, who's a director and a filmmaker, one of the most talented people I've ever met. He thinks about concepts like this very, very deeply with like a very, very, I love his brain, but I had a conversation with him recently where we were talking about the same thing, and he was telling me how he thinks like the worst side effect of social media on art has been that we know artists. He thinks that like part of the most important one of the most important things about art for all of time has been that to a degree we don't understand these people, and because of the fact that we don't understand these people, what they're creating or what they mean by it, we can instill our own values in it. We can look at it and say like, that's about me, that's about my story. And he thinks once we get to this place where art is like ultra like objective about yourself, like ultra personal about like a certain person, it's way harder to throw yourself in those situations where you feel like that piece of art's about you. Do you think like as we move forward, social media is like a good or a bad thing for art, like at large? Because I think like what you were talking about, I do think I agree with to a degree. Like I don't know if we should know these people or feel like we know these people to the degree at which we do.
Well, I love this conversation. I think that I go on these like little passion rants with friends all the time, because it's such an interesting route to go down, especially working in areas that we work in, because it's everywhere, you know. And I feel like at this point, it's a radical act to be unknown in like a digital social sphere, and that's something that like shouldn't be as like big of a deal. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I think that's something like I have a good amount of friends too that recently my magazine co-owner and I, Abby, we published a book with our friend Dakota, who's a poet, and we published this book, and before she had any following whatsoever, and now like she's a full-time content creator for her writing, and she's an author, and we were really lucky to be able to tour around the UK and Ireland this past summer with that poetry book. And that was a really eye-opening experience on like the conversation that we're talking about, because it was something where we would go to these places and Dakota would be, out on walks and such, and have random people take her picture and then DM the photo that they took of her to her, like wouldn't talk to her. And so it's this like, I'm assuming this overwhelming feeling of always being watched and never having privacy and never having, those boundaries, because you do have this parasocial relationship where people think that they are entitled to a piece of you, and that isn't necessarily the case.
That's
you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
And so much so, like when you were talking, what I was thinking about was like 30 minutes ago when you were talking about a friend from home, and you were telling me about like something that happened in her life, and for whatever reason, the part about what you were talking about that stuck out to me was she doesn't have an Instagram. Like when you said that, I was like, oh, I think I was gonna say it, but I just never said it. I think I was gonna say like, aren't those the best people? But that's like insane to think about, even compared to what you just said. It's like that was the part that stuck out to me the most. It's almost like it's almost like I don't know if art and social media like are meant to exist in the same plane, because it's like they almost seem like contractual, like they almost seem like they're very much opposite goals and very opposite like drivers, but you have to, in a way, I think very often interact with one to do the other. It's really difficult to be an artist of any kind right now and not have any kind of social media, or at least any kind of online presence. But I do think there are ways to circumvent that. I think there are people who are doing it very well, people who are like bringing the driving force in the industry back to like in-person experiences, back to shows, back to touring. I think it'll be really interesting to watch in the next like 3 to 5 years. Like, will this kind of like cool counterculture movement of people like valuing shows again, will that continue to rise, or will that like go back to where it's like we're valuing TikTok more.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know, with this you also have to kind of consider the concept of the medium as the message. When you think about art on social media, I think that social media and Instagram can be an art, but not all art exist within that plane. And I found myself, especially like in my photo work, the one frustrating thing is that like my ratios that I love to shoot in are not compatible with Instagram. So then I always like it fucking kills me. And then I find myself like taking these images and then thinking about what it will look like in the Instagram crop. And a lot of the photos that I take are for musicians, and thinking about, well, they're gonna have to use them, they're gonna have to post them, what's that gonna look like? And I don't know, I think that that's just so interesting that it's like slowly starting to in more indirect ways, like restructure the ways in which we create our art, no matter what form it exists in.
How do you feel about like where like more scene organized music, and then also just like where like more in-person music communities are right now? I was at a show at this spot that's very close to here that I just found out about, called The Shed, which is like this. It's literally it's so cool. It's like a DIY spot in this industrial shed in this dude's backyard. It's sick. It's so cool. No, we gotta go. It's crazy. But they only do like one show a month. But I was there yesterday. I was talking to Anthony from Cherry Domingo. Shout out to him, great guy. But we were talking about how he feels like he's existed in this like SoCal music scene for like years now, and he feels like now in the past year there's been like more movement in it than like there has for a long time. He said like since COVID. So I'd ask you that same question as somebody who has like existed in the Southern California music scene for a while. Where do you feel like it stands right now? Do you feel like there's being a return to more in-person stuff? Do you feel like we're further from it than we ever have been? How do you feel about it?
Well, firstly, the venue that you're talking about, I had my own version of that in San Diego. It was
really
this random like garage down this weird alley in Chula Vista, and it was a punk venue. It was a punk venue, and it was like they would like push out some crusty couches along the alleyway, and people would just smoke. I remember playing Kick the Can in that back alley in between intermissions for but going back to your question, I think, I don't know, I've been thinking about that a lot recently, because I think in post-COVID, or not post-COVID, because COVID is still around, but I think after more of like a quarantine realm of things sort of came to a bit of an end, we saw a lot of people in local music focusing on a quantity over quality sort of mindset, because people have been so devoid of this for so long. You want to get as much as you possibly can. And I feel like we're going through a bit of like a societal stomach ache in that realm, if that makes sense. Like I think now that intention is finally starting to shift away from that. It's shifting towards less is more. And the intention with that is slowly building, and you can sort of see that in more acts taking inspiration from a lot of the early heavy DIY influences. I think that we're also seeing a fun little wave of zine culture and those elements sort of embedded back into that movement. And I think that also because like as a greater society as well, we've had so many immense global issues arising, and that's one thing that you see over and over again with the uprise of countercultures throughout history, is there's always some sort of social political movement threaded through that. And I think I don't know, that's why it's sort of like a weird hybrid situation, because we have social media, we have access to learning about all of the world's issues, and obviously not everybody focuses on all of those, but we have more happening now, and we're aware of more happening now than anybody has at any other period of time within arts and culture and music, and you're starting to see it woven together in some very beautiful ways. And then the tangibility, I think, grows in importance the more that social media also grows in prevalence. I think more people are starting to realize that. I've been loving the pop-ups I've been seeing, and the friends that are making more like photo books and tangible items, and I don't know, I also just love the like guerrilla style marketing that a lot of people have been leaning into with various projects. I think you just get more creative with it, and you think about art forms that can only exist in a physical sense. Like I have a lot of corners of music I've been seeing branching into the graffiti art scene. Yeah. And that is one that fundamentally can never exist online, because it's illegal, and if you posted your work, you would be tied back to your work, and then that would be an issue. It's something that exists purely in a physical sense, unless somebody else shares it, somebody else comes across it. But a majority of the time, it's exclusively in person. And I have this one friend, one of my best friends in the whole world. His name's Dustin, and he is just like an avid appreciator of tagging and graffiti art and that sort of thing. And walking around with him is one of the most beautiful experiences, because we'll be talking and he'll just be like looking up in the distance into nowhere, and I'll be like, what are you looking at? And it's either like him pointing out a tag and being like, oh my gosh, that tag was written by this person between these years, and this is what was going on in the world during that time. Or it's him looking at a spot and being like, oh, like if you climbed that and went over there and did that, like that'd be a great spot for. And I think that's like a different part of our brain that most people don't exercise very often.
Yeah.
It's like that awareness, and that also like I don't know, you're just always thinking 2 steps ahead of the game in that realm, It's
almost like, I do know what you mean. I think I really connected with what you were saying. It's like, I think we are almost as connected as we possibly can be, but that in turn, in some way, shape, or form, like makes us almost as unconnected as we can be. It's like we feel like we know everything about some small music niche corner that is in like New York when we live in LA, but it's like we don't even know that there's venues 2 minutes from our houses, like. And it's so weird, because I know what you mean, and it's so weird to me. I think about this a lot, where it's like my life is music. All I do all day is music related things. It's like it's how I make my money, it's how I live, it's everything to me. It's all I care about. And there are people who blow up on the internet, like go viral, that I've never heard of. Like, and my friend would be like I have friends would be like, oh, like this, did you hear about this artist who blew up? No. Hear about this person that blew up? No. And they have like millions and millions and millions of listeners, but it's like there's just so much that out there right now that we can be so ultra unaware. So it's like, when it's that saturated, can like small niche musical communities even exist? And if they can, like how do they supersede the bigger things that have more numbers online?
I think about this all the time. I think about this all the time, especially in the metric of like physical spaces too, because I think like the more chronically online we become, the less these sort of in-person scenes sort of exist.
Wow,
one thing that I think about a lot is like all of the clubs that used to exist in New York in like the 70s and 80s, and one is I always had this fascination with Cafe Bazaar when I was a child, and
that's a really cool name.
It's really cool. It was this really fun little it was a spot in New York, and that's where Andy Warhol discovered the Velvet Underground, or at least like saw them perform for the first time. But it was just like a weird eclectic space that artists would come and circulate. And also, like, I don't know, I talk about this with my friends too, in terms of like consciousness raising groups. It's a concept that is very prevalent in,
what is that? Can you explain that?
Yeah. It is consciousness raising groups, or consciousness raising circles, are a concept that was extremely prevalent in the intersection of arts, social justice, and like philosophy. So they're essentially just like groups of people that would get together and discuss various topics with all different sorts of backgrounds and perspectives and thought processes. And that was, it was obviously something that existed before you could just Google what something was.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that the process of getting somewhere is much more important than where you get in the end, because it crafts, like we're talking about context, it crafts everything around that. And I wonder where that context has gone now that we don't have these, very set in-person circles. Everybody's having dialogue everywhere, but then like where does the importance fall in that realm? And like, how do you choose what to tune into and what not to tune into? How do you know what's making an actual effect on people versus what's a passive comment? Because it's so easy to just post something online versus, having that face-to-face discussion with someone and really seeing the human context behiend it. But,
and I think as like an art maker, like in any way, shape, or form, that becomes even more difficult to reconcile with. It's like, is there a way that you can still impact people? Like, is there a way to still affect people? It's so hard to like, for so long I felt so isolated because I felt like everything I was making, I was just throwing it into the void. And I think that's because I was so ultra chronically online as a kid. And like when I started, like, I put up like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of like articles about music and like different music reviews and like different like, think pieces that no one read. That are just like on the internet with like 4 readers, like 4 people in the world have probably read them. And it's like just throwing shit into the void for years and years and years made me feel so isolated to the point where it was like I didn't know if I would ever impact people. And it was so strange that the only time I ever really felt like I started to do so was when we started throwing shows. It was like when you could see the people, when it was physical, when you were in that space together and you existed, together. You know what I mean?
I have a note. Yeah. I'm going to go back to the question that you asked before this, because I didn't answer that, but I'm also going to respond to that because I think that they're both very intrinsically tied together. I think that, like, you were talking about, not anybody, but like a lot of people are blowing up, and you sort of have all of these individuals with like large audiences and what we would sort of deem as like, successful standpoints. Sure, yeah. And I think that like the main thing that shifts is our metrics of success in that realm, because now I feel like a following doesn't really mean much, because I've also noticed that like you have these collections of individuals who have very large social media followings, and then they do their first show and then they cannot sell a single ticket. 9
people there, yeah.
Yeah, and I've worked some of these shows, and especially the ones that sell out are the ones that the industry is obsessed with. So 90% of the people in attendance and they're all on the list. Yeah. And so then that creates the illusion of the online success translating to an in-person success, because to everyone like looking from the outside in, it seems like, oh my God, like they sold out their first show so fast and they also have XYZ followers. Like I couldn't get a ticket. It was so hard, blah, blah, blah. And then I feel like, it's all an illusion at this point. Yeah. But I like commenting about what you said, writing all these articles and throwing them into the void. I think that I relate to that very, very immensely, but in a slightly different way, whereas I found immense comfort in that void. And I think when I was creating work into the void, that was when I was the happiest, the most content, and the most honest with the work that I was putting together, because I had nobody else in mind. And in my head, nobody was on the other receiving end. And obviously, like a couple years into my work, there were a lot of people on the receiving end. But with that mindset, like I did not realize, like to a T, like I was taking a writing class in Paris 2 summers ago, and I remember I was in this small town on the outskirts, and this girl came up to me and she was like, "I'm so sorry, this is so weird, but are you Kyla Rain?" And I was like, yeah. And she was from, I actually don't know if she was from San Diego, but she was from California. Europe? She was in Europe, crazy. And she saw me and she recognized she recognized me, and she was like, "I've been following your work for, XYZ however long, and I love what you do, and blah blah blah, and we're mutuals on Instagram." She creates beautiful photography, and I don't know, I feel like that's something that like it used to happen a lot more when I was like, younger and in San Diego, because the scene was small. But the fact that it still happens to this day, and I don't know, I want to get back to that like void mentality of like nobody's on the other end, Interesting. That's almost, it's like we existed kind of like opposites in that regard, I feel like, because that is really cool. Like I think it's like really beautiful that you were able to just create for the sake of creating. And I think I look at it differently. I think when I began, I was making things that I loved because, and I'll say this, and it might sound selfish, it might not, but I was making things that I loved because I wanted a community. It was like what I wanted. Like I wanted friends. Like I wanted people to like gather in any way, shape, or form to appreciate the thing that we all love together. I wanted to recreate like what it felt like when I was going to these shows. Like I wanted to like recreate that in some regard, So it was like, go ahead. I have a question for you. Yeah. And I don't want to. No, you're good. But I want to add on to that, because my question for you is, do you feel like, because I also was like, I have no friends, I want to make friends. How can I do that? By talking about shit that I love. I'll find other people that also love it. But do you think that like the notion of virality that we have now impacted how you imagined that success metric for yourself, Oh yeah. 100%.
Because like when I really started caring about this was at the midst of when everybody was playing this online lottery, and it's like we were all just throwing shit into the void hoping that something would get picked up. Like we were all just hoping that something would go viral, and it was like it was impossible to create things online at that time period and not chase that to a certain degree. But it was like I still was making things I love, and I'm proud to say that I've never made anything in my entire life that I didn't feel like I would love. But I certainly was trying to do it to get people to pay attention at a certain point. And it was ironic that I had to take a step back and like kind of deconstruct in my head, like, why do I care about the amount of likes on this post? Why do I care about like the amount of people seeing it? Why do I care about how many people view it, whatever. But it was like I had to deconstruct, like, why do I care about the number of people who see it, or do I care about a community? And I was like, well, I care about a community, but I'm never going to feel a community through my phone to a degree. At least I didn't. I understand that some people can, and I've met so many. Like literally all my best friends I've met through the internet. Like,
yeah. Oh, same here. Yeah. My best friend in the entire world, who I co-own this company with for the last, oh my god, almost like 7-8 years now.
Crazy.
We met online, and we like only like 2-3 years into our friendship met in person. She lives in Australia. I've like
that's so cool.
only been in person with her a very limited amount of times, but yeah, I think so, you know, social media does some good things.
Yeah, 100%. But it was like I wanted it to feel real. And I think maybe it was because it seems like when you first started Pure Nowhere, like you very much like were ingrained in the scene of music. I think I was like on the outside of a scene looking in for a long time that I wanted to be more of a part of. I wanted to create a community, and now like I feel so lucky every single day that there's like a group of people who like are like part of like this community that is above the bridge that we've created. But it's like, that's what I want. I want to like combat that notion of virality. Like I want to combat that notion that like these numbers will fulfill your happiness. It's the same way that I feel so adverse to the idea that money creates happiness. It's like, I was talking to my roommate today about this. I can't remember I'm trying to remember the example he was saying. I think he was talking about a billionaire that he met, and how like that billionaire that he met, I'm talking about Tokyo. Yeah, but he was talking about like a billionaire that he met, and how he was talking to the guy, and it seemed like the guy didn't have like a lot of friends. And he was saying how it was interesting how like you can have all the money in the world but not have friends. And then I was kind of made this point where I was like, it seems to me that money brings you everything but the things that really matter. Like you can buy anything with money except the things that we really need, like love or friendship or self-admiration or like, you know, the confidence. You can't buy those things. And that's sort of how I feel with like the virality aspect within like different music circles or art circles or whatever. It's like you can create your entire life. I don't think people consuming what you make is what's going to make you feel like it's good. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I feel that very, very immensely. And I think that that's something that my perspective on wanting to go back to the void is very deeply stemmed from burnout, from very immense burnout, because it was something where like with Pure Nowhere, it was something, well, for many years when it started, it was the only thing that I dedicated my life towards. You know, it was my baby, my child, made me so happy. And we were really lucky where that was, you know, before the era of virality. So our community was mainly in person, and we did have a community, and it was lovely. We would throw events in San Diego and people would come out. We've sold out every show we've ever done.
That's
and
so
it was
cool.
Beautiful. I remember when we started throwing larger events, our first one in LA was this show called Art Prom, and we had about 300 people show up. Everyone dressed per theme. It was a fundraiser event for my friend's nonprofit at the time, and I had like people like drive down from San Francisco, and a girl flew in from New York who I did not know, had never met. She just DM'd me. She goes, "Hey, this is so random, but this looks cool. If I flew out for this, could you house me?"
Crazy.
And it was like one big beautiful sleepover. Like people were taking trains and buses and carpooling together that had never met before. And I think that was the happiest I'd ever been in my entire life, was then, you know, thinking that I was speaking to a void for so long, and then seeing that tangible action with it, and then also getting messages afterwards of a lot of people met like their significant others at that show and being like,
that's crazy. That's I talk about that all the time. Like I tell him that all the time. Like that's like my dream. Like my dream, like I literally say this all the time. Like my dream is like someone to meet their best friend above the bridge show, or someone to fall in love at an above the bridge show, or someone to like decide they want to make music at an above the bridge show.
Dude,
like that's so cool.
From what I've heard, I feel like that's very, very likely that it's happened, because I was talking to Morgan on the way over here, and she was saying the show that she played with the Above the Bridge show that she played in San Francisco, that she went to it and she was just like blown away at the amount of people that were there, the amount of energy that was there, and the amount of like, you know, connected love that was very present within the audience and within the people playing and within every aspect, you know?
Thank you. That makes me happy.
And that's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, that one was special. Like, that one was literally, I was, I don't even think I told you this, Mario, but when I was in the Bay Area, I had one day where I just, like, I woke up at 6 a.m. I couldn't get back to sleep. And I was staying in a room at my parents' house, and my parents have a Keurig, and they always got the pods stocked, which is super nice. So I made like a bunch of coffee, and I literally sat at my desk for like 11 and a half hours, and I went through every single interview that I've ever done, and I compiled this hour-long video of all of the all my favorite like 3 to 8 minute conversations within those interviews, and it was so fun. I'm probably gonna put it out sometime this month, but I had so much fun doing it. And while I was doing it, I was like looking kind of at Above the Bridge through like a timeline, right? And it's so interesting that you mentioned that show, because in my head, like, everything led up to that moment. Like, that show was when I think it's probably my equivalent to what you were just describing, when everybody was coming for that event. It was like when I realized that, like, I wasn't throwing things into the void anymore. It was when things started to matter a bit more. It's interesting. So let me ask you this: when do you think you first like felt burnout? Like, you're 24, right?
I'm 23.
23, okay. Yeah. When do you think you first felt any sort of burnout, and why do you think you felt it at that time?
I have an exact date.
Perfect.
That I can tell you for this. I don't actually remember the day itself, but I remember what happened and what led up to that realization. So it was early quarantine, the original quarantine time, and Abby and I had downloaded TikTok, and that was, before it became like it was like a platform on the come up at that time. And so we posted a TikTok video about our print issue that we had published when I was 16 and she was 15 years old. And it went viral, and overnight we went from about 6,000 followers on Instagram to I think like 14,000 followers.
Jeez.
And we got a massive influx of submissions through our emails through the website. And that was something where at the time the main people working on the publication were myself, my co-owner Abby, a small handful of various contributors who sort of like phased in and out as their lives ebbed and flowed. That was about it. Like, the only two reliable people were Abby and I. And then we were like, well, we have all this new interest. Why don't we try to expand and get a bit more solidified? Because up until that point, our dream was to always figure out a way to make the magazine our full-time job, you know, to make it our full-time job, to be able to employ the people that we loved and admired, and just make more financial stability within art itself.
Of course, yeah.
And then we opened up applications, and in less than 24 hours, we had over 500 applications to join our team. Fully unpaid positions, like volunteer, like we were very much like, we are children doing this because we love it. So if you would like to join us. And so we vetted from those 500 applications, we went through every single one, and we narrowed it down to maybe like 150, and then we did Zoom interviews with those 150 people, and we ended up crafting a team of over 70 people around the world that were like working pretty substantially for us. We were very, very grateful for them, because we were putting up content every single day, at least one piece more. And this was also like 2020 was also a time that was very emotionally, politically, and socially charged as well, with the Black Lives Matter movement. So we were publishing like a lot of content, and a lot of just trying to platform a lot of beautiful individuals and voices that hadn't necessarily had space beforehand. And that was always sort of the root of what we did, but it also sort of took a shift now when we got this very large audience of, now there are more people watching us, there are more eyes, we have to appeal to this broader audience. And we started just sort of shifting focus on what we did to publishing a lot of content because we felt a responsibility to do so, versus content that actually made us feel fulfilled and happy and content with what we were doing, but didn't realize until very far down the line. So we went with, we continued down that, 70-person team for about maybe like a year. And that's something, coordinating weekly meetings across time zones, obviously still shipping out our publication, because with that boom we were selling magazines like out the wazoo. Like my mail lady fucking hated me at that point, because so many international shipping slips and just so much going out into the world. And that definitely burnt us out pretty intensely. And then, you know, we took a small break and then came back. And then during that break, we were silently working on that poetry book on Sun Swallowing that we published with Dakota. At the time, she was, you know, just a girl who had been a writer on our team, and she was working at a grocery store in Australia and was a beautiful poet. And then, of course, TikTok comes to play, and then she gets amasses quite a substantial audience for her writing around the time that we put out the book. And that was something where that book was supposed to be, you know, it was our first venture into the publishing world outside of the magazine that we'd put together. And we expected to only sort of make a couple hundred copies through a small event in Australia for friends and family. And instead, we ended up continuously shipping out that particular book for maybe 3 years. We sold, oh my God, probably like thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. I haven't done the flat numbers, but it was Abby's full-time job for a while. It was just like, she lives in a van, and so her entire van and her mom's house at home and at her friend's house, just stock of books. And it was something where we're like that blew up to something larger than we ever expected. And of course, it led to beautiful things. We got nominated for Best Poetry Book of the Year, made it to the Final Four, which was incredible.
So beautiful. Congratulations. That's so cool.
Thank you. Only independent publishing house in that realm, too, which was really lovely. And then Abby and Dakota toured around Australia, and then we did the UK and Ireland tour. But that was also something that we just like... Eventually, it got to a point where it was something that we did because we had to, and not necessarily because we wanted to.
Wow.
And after the last tour, we just got to the point where we're like, okay, guys, like everyone was in agreement. We never speak about this book again. We never touch it. We've moved past it. We're done. But even then, we were doing all of that work in like a deep state of burnout, and like the website was still paused. Like everything else that we did that we loved the most about music, about publishing, about art and culture, and, you know, the community that we had created, all of that got put on pause because of this other project that swallowed everything up. And I don't know, I feel like it's just been a small series of chapters that have engulfed the joy, you know. And so kind of stepping back and figuring out, you know, what made you the happiest and why it made you the happiest, and coming to terms with the fact that some people might not understand why you backtrack, I guess. Of course. Yeah, and that's something where, like, now I never in a million years would want the magazine to be my full-time job. I want it to be the job that I work because I want to and not because I have to. And I want to channel that money into more projects and paying the people that we work with where, like, it is their full-time job, you know, and feel happy and content and, yeah, like I'm saying what I need to say.
I've only known about Pure Nowhere for probably like 2 years, but I think what really inspired me when I first found it, and this is very consistent with most things that I find that I get inspired by, is that I couldn't tell what it was. I couldn't pin it down. And that, I think, was what was really cool about it when I first found it and what attracted me to it. Do you think, like, as it continues to morph and change and become something anew, it seems like, I guess I'm answering my question. It seems like you have learned to embrace those changes. Do you agree with that? Do you think you've learned that whatever it turns into is what it's meant to be? Or is there still a part of yourself and your heart that is clinging to those 500 submissions in 2020 and scaling that to something different?
I think that there is always a part of me that will cling to the people that we were before those 500 applications. Wow. You know, I think that was, at least in my mind, really the golden era of what we had created, and the time that felt the best and that connected with people in a way that felt really true and really right. I think that the 500 applications era was sort of not as dramatic as this, but it was sort of like the beginning of the end, you know. And I think we're slowly trying to make our way back to that original standpoint of like why we started doing it in the first place. And I think I definitely have learned to embrace those changes, but at the same time, trying very desperately to get back what we once had. And I think that was something where like last year I was supposed to throw a second art prom. I'd been trying to do that since we did the first one, and obviously COVID, and then because of COVID, all of the accessible spaces, you know, closed down. So then there's nowhere to throw a concert if you don't have previous money, but then you don't have money because you're a kid trying to do something.
Yeah.
And last year I had found this beautiful, wonderful venue, 500 person capacity. I had a team of 12 people helping me craft this. I had sponsors. I had, these installations built out, and the shows that I used to throw before COVID were immersive arts and music shows. And so we would build large scale installations. We'd have live music. We'd have other pop-ups. Everybody would come dressed per theme. It was like a beautiful community space.
That's so cool.
And I wanted this to happen so badly, and at the last possible minute that I could make the decision, I made the decision not to do the event, because I sort of realized that with where I am now, or at least so the last event in that realm that I threw was February 2020, and it was called Heaven on Earth. And I remember finishing that event and immediately afterwards getting home and crying so hard that I couldn't get up. I couldn't get off the floor. I just fell asleep on the floor of my dorm room because I was so tired and I was so overwhelmed. And the way that I work as a creative individual, unfortunately, is 120% thrown into something, even if it means that I break myself apart in the process.
I feel it. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. And then getting to this other event and then having a lot of this fear, because I realized that, my metrics of success are very different than the metrics of other individuals now, but also still feeling like I needed to live up to other people's idea of a successful event, and realizing that I was putting so much pressure on this one project, and I was going to put so much of myself, and especially now being, living in a disabled body, is like I will throw 110, 120, 150% into this project, and maybe it turns out exactly how it needs to be, but if it's not exactly how I want it to be, then I don't know if I'll be able to pick myself up at the end of it, so that was a whole interesting process, because it got very deep and I learned a lot about myself, and I was very proud for making that decision, but also that was a very, very difficult choice to make. It made me very, very sad.
I think I know exactly what you're describing and what you mean. I think we are often sold this lie that the most successful route is the route that will make us happiest. We're sold this lie, and I fell into this deeply. I really relate to what you're saying. I think when I was younger, probably, because I started in 2018, in June of 2018, and Above the Bridge existed in a million forms since then, but it was when I found what I thought it was, I threw myself into it in a very similar fashion to what you're describing, and I destroyed my mental health, and I don't think I realized it in the moment. And it's strange when the fog clears and you realize that sleeping 4 hours a night isn't normal, or you realize that deprioritizing any sort of relationship with any other human being in my life and locking myself in a room in my parents' house and is not normal. But then there's something in the back of your brain that's telling you that working hard is healthy and working hard is good. And there was a point where I think I took a step back. I think it's probably when I moved to LA, and I started asking myself what the goal was, because I don't think I had taken a step back for a while to even truly realize what it is I was working towards. And it's really strange, I think, often that we find these very specific benchmarks where it's for me it was when Above the Bridge does this, I'll be happy, or when Above the Bridge throws this show, I'll be happy, or when we do this many followers, I'll be happy, or whatever it was, we interview this person, I'll be happy. It was I kept putting this comma on my happiness. It was I then will be happy, I then will feel fulfilled. And for a long time it was just similar to what you were saying, where you and Abby just wanted to make a living off what you were doing and support people that you love. That was my benchmark for a long time. And it's now I'm very lucky to get to I'm at a place where I'm supporting myself full time off music stuff, and I'm very, very grateful and very, very lucky. And I think I was terrified that when I got here it wouldn't make me happier. And I think it's very interesting. I'm genuinely happier than I've ever been. I think I have a better relationship with my work now than I ever have. And I think it's not because I am working harder than ever. It's because I'm working on things that I love. And it's I'm not allowing myself to do anything that I think would benefit my career if I don't enjoy it, and I don't think it's worthwhile. I don't think it's providing value. And I think when you do things from a place of like that level of genuineness and that level of patience forever, like you in the long run will always be rewarded. I think like you taking a step back is probably the best thing you could have done for the long-term future of Pure Nowhere, but even beyond that, it's probably better for you, I'm sure. And it's strange that like we so often like, because it seems to me that you stumbled into Pure Nowhere, right? Like it's not like you facilitated this and planned this. You didn't plan for this to be what consumed your entire child life and your entire teens and your young adult life. The same thing with Above the Bridge. Like I very much stumbled into it, and it's strange that like there's a point where something goes from a hobby to your life, and it's weird to like identify where that switch happens, you know? But it was just like, for me, it was like I exhausted all other options. It was like every sign like led me back to this, and I'm happy that I did. I'm so grateful, and I love it, and I'm happy that I haven't like yet to feel that symbol of burnout you were describing. But I would imagine that like it definitely makes you take a step back and redefine your relationship with your work.
Yeah, I think that it's actually kind of funny, because when I was really deep in that sort of pause and separation from Pure Nowhere, there was not a single day where I didn't think about it. And it's the one thing that I want more than anything else in the world, is just to like mend that relationship.
Wow.
And I think that that's also what I mean, what you were talking about with what you were talking about just a moment ago. I think that's what I mean when I say I want to get back to that void, you know, because it feels like in your own way you found your void. You found like, you're like, this is what I'm going to put out, and I'm putting it out because it makes me happy, and it's relating to people, and that's beautiful. But the deep content comes from within you.
100%.
And I think that that's beautiful and magical and incredible. And I think that like that realization was what also made me decide not to do that one event. Was realizing that like I was also partially doing it out of spite, because I feel like LA in general and the chapter of my life that exists in Los Angeles has taken away so many aspects of art and music that I loved the most, that I felt the most connected to.
What do you mean? That's interesting.
LA, I like to say, is a lot of industry and not a lot of artists sometimes. You know?
I just had a conversation about this. I know exactly what you mean.
And I think that that's something that I was not aware of when coming into it, and that's something that I sort of didn't realize until much later on. And that was something where I obviously exist in this space among some very beautifully talented individuals that all function in different realms of music, but we've also all had very different experiences within music in general. A lot of my friends, the only aspect of music that they know is the music industry, and I feel like the music industry and the music scene are two very different worlds.
So different, yeah.
And like I would find myself, you know, like telling my friends about the shows that I would throw, and having them sort of look at me or make a remark that was like, oh, like that's a nice idea, but I felt like they didn't actually believe me, that like that's how it was. Because you come to LA and, you know, people practicality, people do things for a purpose. They go to an event because XYZ is going to be there. I feel like I go to shows now, it feels like everyone's competing for a cool card, and I'm just tired, and I just want to listen to music and hang out with friends, and it just feels like there's a bit more pressure, and there's a bit less love for very raw reasons, which is not to say that that's like everywhere and that's, you know, the only thing that exists. I just think that at the moment, and especially in the city, it's much more prevalent because, you know, everybody's trying to make it, and that's beautiful and lovely, but it does create some really interesting energies that I feel like can get very toxic after a while. There's a
lot of ego.
But then and then that's when I realized that was the reason why I wanted to do that event, was because I wanted to show all of my friends that had never experienced that before, like prove them like it exists, and I'm not just like stupid and wistful and like misremembering things. Like that's exactly how it was. And, you know, sort of stepping back, and since then I've thrown some lovely events with two of my friends, Mia and Minhan, and they have provided me with exactly what I missed the most from the past events that I used to throw, but they're drastically different and very different communities of people that show up to those spaces too. But I feel like it reinstilled that love and assurance that my feelings of joy do not exist in that one singular form that I was holding on to so tightly, you know?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think I realized that when I'm sure you had this moment too. When I came to LA and I realized, like, you go to a show and it's like you feel like you're being watched. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I feel like everybody's just like sussing each other out.
Yeah.
Like everybody comes
hitting one of these,
like fully fitted with like a too cool for school mentality.
Yeah.
I remember going like the thing that I love most about shows is that you could go up and talk to anyone.
I know what you mean.
And now I feel like I go up and talk to someone, they look at me like I'm insane. They're like, you know what I mean?
It's very cathartic that you feel this way too, because I know exactly what you mean. It was like I made fun of it when I first moved to LA, because it was like I felt like this is so weird, but like when I was a kid, I never like felt like I would be somebody who like danced at concerts. I never felt like I would be that. And then I started going to shows in the Bay Area when I was a kid, and I fell in love with just like looking stupid. Looking stupid is my favorite. Yeah, exactly. Like just like dancing dumbly in a pit or whatever. But it's like I moved to LA, and that just doesn't. It feels so different. I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like you're being watched, you know?
Can we talk about an issue that LA has? I think it's an epidemic. I think it needs to be fixed.
Yes.
Nobody here dances.
That's what I'm saying.
You go to concerts and nobody dances. Everybody does like the cool guy lean in the back, and then you have like a hype kind of mosh pit, but it's not like actual moshing.
Yeah.
But then with that, also with COVID, nobody has concert etiquette anymore. So then you go to a show and people try to mosh, and it's unsafe because nobody knows like how to take care of the people around you, how to properly engage with a crowd surfer. People are going to crowd surf. You support them, they support you, but like people are hurling their body into crowds of individuals that aren't ready to catch them.
The show was at last night. This girl tried to crowd surf, and she jumped like, because it's a pretty like DIY setup. So she jumped on this PA and to like crowd surf, right? Because like somebody else did it. This girl like had like OG docks on, like the older docks, like the boot docks. I swear to God, she jumped feet foot first into a crowd, and she hit somebody in the neck, and she like fell, and I was like, you can't do that. I was like, you cannot jump like you have to, like, it's like she literally like looked like she was trying to like step on this girl. Like I was like, that is, you're gonna hurt somebody. Yeah, I know what you mean. We were at a show over the weekend, and there was this dude who like, it was very tame. It was a very tame pit. It was a very tame circle pit, like for a circle pit. And then this one guy was just going elbow first into people who like were very obviously like separated from the pit, like very much like not trying to engage with it. And it's just like, sometimes I'd question, like, are people just angry? Like sometimes people just get upset, I think, and want like an expression. Like
the thing is though is that I understand the release of anger.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
Like when I was in high school, I used to go to hardcore shows all the time. Mind you, love hardcore music now. Wasn't the greatest fan back then, but I loved the atmosphere because it was somewhere where you could be angry.
True.
In like a safe and respectful way, which was interesting. But also, my friend and I would go to these shows and we would dress up as feminine, girly. We were like 16 years old, obviously, and they're like all these old men, like
tatted up old men, like shaved heads, tank tops.
I remember I went with one of my friends this one time, and she is a very, very small individual. She was wearing like a little purple tube top, the American Apparel like tennis skirt and some jelly sandals. And there's this man sandals.
That's crazy.
And there's this man up on stage, just going as you do. And she jumps up on stage. She goes and she jumps into the crowd and she crowd surfs, and everyone's very thrown off, and she's going around and somebody accidentally elbows her in the face. And this man is just horrified. He's hit this girl. He goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." The whole pit stops, which great concert etiquette, right? Yeah. I feel like the places where I felt the safe, some of the places that I felt the safest in terms of concerts have been at hardcore shows, because people they
all go to a lot of shows.
They all go to a lot of shows. They know how to take care of the individuals around them. Not all of them, but some of them. And so the whole pit stops, and I watch her as she has blood pouring down her nose. She looks at this man, she smiles, she licks the blood off of her teeth, and she starts the pit back up, and the sheer fear in this man's eyes. I have a photo of her outside that venue with blood dripping all the way down her it was
I would be scared.
Badass.
That's terrifying.
There was that. I dislocated my jaw in the mosh pit once, but that was an accident. That was someone being a little stupid. And the thing is,
did you get that feeling where you like when your jaw, like that feeling whenever you bite down? I got hit in a pit one time, a couple times, and I've gotten this feeling like where you try to bite down. Every time you bite down, it isn't right. It just doesn't feel right, and like you can't really eat for like a day, and it just like hurts.
See, this was This was like almost like completely like I remember I am well because I'm a very like I feel like people don't realize how easy it is to just like shove me into the void and I just go flying, and I went and I hit this guy's shoulder. I just remember like feeling my jaw like pop out of place, and I ran to the bathroom and I like shoved it back in, and then I went back out to the show and I kept going. And I remember by the end the entire side of my face was swollen and purple and gross. But the thing is that like you go to I was a lot more intense when I was younger than I am now. But after shows, we would go to In-N-Out, and it
always
was
the move.
Always the move, yeah. And the man who the man whose shoulder I hit felt so bad. He bought me a milkshake. People were buying me fries, were buying me cheeseburgers, were being like, "Are you okay?" Blah blah blah. And then it's like, I don't know. I feel like I went off on a side tangent. I don't know if this is great concert. Well, I feel like the care that people instill on each individual is great concert etiquette. And then I got a little off topic with some fun concert stories. But I feel like if that were to happen now, nobody would give two shits.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I don't know. Like maybe it's just that was something I was thinking about. Like when you were talking about your hardcore childhood. I was talking about this with a friend recently. It's crazy to me how like in every single city, regardless if there is a music scene or not a music scene, the one consistent scene in every single city is a hardcore scene. Every single city has a hardcore scene. They all do. Like there's literally like nowhere that like doesn't have a hardcore scene. It just seems like it's the one thing for whatever reason that people are attracted to everywhere, like universally. And it's almost like nobody really knows about it besides the people who are like in that scene. You know, it's very like niche, but literally everywhere has one. I feel like.
I think that's what also keeps it like so. I don't think safe is the right word because obviously nowhere is 100% safe, but I think that like that's what keeps it very I don't know, that's what keeps concert etiquette alive there, I guess, which is to say it's not everywhere, but the most respectful, most safest crowds that I've been in, a majority of them have been hardcore concerts. Yeah. Or like really like heavy like punk shows or things that you just wouldn't necessarily expect to be. And some of the most disrespectful, some of the most like shows where I have gotten the most hurt and like not taken care of have been at like softcore indie shows because those people end up being assholes half the time because everybody feels entitled to something.
I know exactly what you mean.
I feel like at the hardcore shows everyone's on a pretty equal level, you know, you're all just like releasing that little bit of rage at
it's
the
like
end
an
of the
embrace
day.
of like how strange it is that we all love this similar genre, you know. It's like everybody embraces the fact that they're angry and kind of like creates this world where like you're not angry.
Precisely. And that's also something where like I'm so sorry, local hardcore scenes, half that music is ass.
No, so I feel you.
There because they like listening to it. People are there because they like to be in that space and that environment. Yeah. And like at the root of it, like that's what we're missing again. I feel like with some of the music that we have going on at the moment. I feel like, you know, there's a lot of shows that people go to because they feel like they should and not necessarily because they want to.
It's like everybody taking themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
You know?
Whatever happened to being silly? That's one thing. That was my goal last year. That's still my goal this year is to just be like sillier in life. I feel like that's something that like not a lot of people sort of step back and think about. Like what's the little extra element of silliness I can add to myself, and then that makes other people around you feel like they've got permission to be more silly, and then next thing you know the entire crowd is like, I don't know, doing the Macarena or some shit. I feel like it would just be better if people were sillier.
Like it's not that deep, you know? Like we all think it's so deep and we all have to look a certain way at shows and be a certain person, but it's literally like no, like I always think like whenever I get anxious at a show, because that is so funny that's like a newer, like that's only happened in the past year for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it's like whenever or even just like a party or whatever, I take a step back and I tell myself, no one's looking at you, Dante. Like no one gives a shit. like nobody is more concerned about you than they are themselves at this moment.
Yeah, and I feel like that's something that used to be threaded very deeply into local music and has sort of like lost its way in the process, and that's like one of the main pillars that I sort of build into the events that I do through now, which are more like, you know, more experimental, more poetry, more like audio installation kind of setting. But the main thing that I always strive for is creating a space where everybody feels like they can show up in exactly the degree that they are in and feel comfortable and welcomed and find some sort of tangible element that they can engage with. Because I feel like a lot of the scene now is very like, well, it's always been inaccessible, but in a more abstract light is very inaccessible to a lot of people, especially as we're experiencing, I feel like, higher rates of burnout on all levels, especially as, I don't know, I feel like after COVID, a lot of people developed really severe social anxiety or just like trouble in large crowds. And then you have like the overstimulation for neurodivergent individuals or people who are very triggered by that. And I feel like there aren't enough options and there's not enough consideration for accessible spatial design in that realm, you know?
When you started throwing like more experimental nature events opposed to like more traditional concert settings, did you do so out of retaliation of that lack of resources that or like lack of access that you saw at concerts? Interesting.
No, I'm so sorry. I was nodding.
Oh, okay.
And, like I was listening. No, actually, unfortunately, in a very selfish way, I started building those environments because I became somebody who needed them very deeply.
That's not selfish.
I feel like it is though, because it wasn't something. I feel like.
Well, you're not the only one that needs them.
I know, but I feel like it was selfish in the way where it was never something that I thought about when I was an able-bodied individual. And I feel like that is like a very like it stems from a larger societal issue. But as like, you know, a personal case study, that wasn't something that I considered before I was, before I became disabled, before all my chronic illnesses arose, before that just sort of impacted the ways in which I exist in the world completely, you know, and then realizing like, oh shit, like there's not really much here for that. There's a rarity of it. And if it does exist, it's very few and far between. And it's also not like widely embraced by the general music community, if that makes sense.
Not at all.
And so like, I don't know, I think that that's something that's missing, and I think I would like to see more of that as we move forward. And I think that it's also something that more people are becoming attuned to, thank goodness. But yeah, I don't know.
Was that like a moment where you began, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I could just be like reading this incorrectly, but when you started doing that, or was there another moment when Pure Nowhere became more to you than just like a music and culture zine? Like, when do you think it became something that was, because it seems to me now, like when I think of Pure Nowhere and it's like modern iteration, a lot of it is non-musical. There's a lot of things that it you know, obviously there's the book and stuff, and like you guys doing the book tour, you guys publishing now, doing all kinds of stuff that is like not directly related to music. When do you think that switch came, and was there any bit of like, I don't want to say insecurity, but like trying to hold on to the music aspect of it? This could definitely be me projecting, because like I think as I've grown and what I've done, and I, you know, my interests have expanded, and what I've wanted to talk about has expanded. I have at times felt insecure about like talking about things that weren't music, because I felt like at a certain point they were outside of my realm of expertise or like direct passion. So when you kind of began to branch out into things that weren't directly music related, how did you do so, and did you feel yourself like clinging to just the more music oriented stuff?
Yeah, well, for a brief timeline of Pure Nowhere, just for context, I started trying to build the website when I was in 8th grade. Freshman year of high school, got it fully up, and then it was about maybe like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, to when I met Abby online, and she was running her own online publication called Seafoaming at the time. And up until that point, Pure Nowhere was just a local music zine. That was all I did. I wrote about concerts, wrote about music. I had one friend, Annika, who would drive up from Tijuana and photograph shows, and I would publish all her photos. Whoa. She was the only person we would publish because she's the only photographer that I knew. And then that happened, then Abby and I met, and then we did this thing where we were like sister publications, and we would like co-post some of our articles and link them back to, you know, the other person's magazine. And then we were like, this is stupid. All of our dreams are exactly the same. Everything that you're good at, I need help with, and vice versa. So then we merged them together into the Pure Nowhere that exists now. And it existed as a publication for a while, and then we did a lot of events, and then we started producing some short films and stuff, and we did like a lot of really fun side projects. And then publishing houses where we sort of melted into now. And there will always be that element of music. I think the original inspiration for the name Pure Nowhere was that feeling, you know, when a song swallows a moment whole, and every time you listen to that song,
yes.
in the back of your head, you know exactly how the room smelt, how it felt,
100%.
what you were thinking about. When I was younger, I was like, oh, like that's this really interesting, like non-existent space. And so that was the tagline in the very, very beginning was pure nowhere. It's where the music takes you.
Wow, I love that.
And then as we sort of evolved, it became more synonymous with this idea of home, because also just like Abby and I going through phases, you know, angsty teenage years, not really knowing where we felt most at home and where we belonged, and wanting to craft that sort of like in-between space. And then the tagline changed, pure nowhere, for when no physical place feels like home, because we wanted this sort of liminal space that felt very welcoming and beautiful.
I love that. I love how like a tagline can like develop over time. Right? That's so cool. Like I think about like, and I think I just started thinking about this actually like literally in the past like 3 months. Like above the bridge, like the tagline's always been like make music matter. When I first came up with that, it meant nothing to me at all. It sounded cool. That was like what it meant to me, and now it means so much to me. But it only means so much to me now because of the current landscape, and where like so much of what I think about on a daily basis is how do you combat this environment of oversaturation where everything exists artistically like almost directly tied with capitalism, where it's like making money and art are so intertwined now, when I believe that's never how things should have been. I think that is never how where the interests of art has aligned and should align. So it's like making music matter. What that means to me now is like combating this environment of oversaturation and creating things that truly come from yourself, like truly come from passion, truly come from love for this. It's like making music matter is like the equivalent of like looking what you truly love in the face and then chasing it. Like that's what it means to me now. But when like that, I didn't feel that way in 2018 because TikTok hadn't taken it you know, everything over yet. And I didn't feel this urge to combat this strange oversaturation of the music industry. But it's like it expanded and evolved, and it's like it means so much to me now, but it meant nothing to me back then, you know?
Yeah, and context is key with stuff like that. I think that's so beautiful, because I love how relationships to this thing that you've created also shift and change. One thing that Abby and I used to say all the time is that you can't outgrow something that grows with you. And I think that that's something it sounds like you can relate to very immensely. And it's a beautiful feeling. It feels like having a child in the world.
That's exactly what it feels like.
And I think that that's something that like we're still, I don't think we know what our tagline is at the moment, like metaphorically, and that's what we're sort of trying to restructure and reform. I think that music will always be there for us. I don't think that that's something that we necessarily have to hold on to, since it is so embedded. I think that once you step back from music itself, you know, you sort of start examining the environments in which music is created, the purpose it is created for, the people it's created by, and that's where you get this larger expanse of culture. That's why we are a music and culture publication, because there's so much that goes with that. It's the context behind it, you know? And I think you asked a question about like, you know, what do you do when you start sharing content that you either don't know a lot about or don't feel, did you say immensely passionate about in that realm? I think that that's something where, well, sharing content, so Pure Nowhere at its root was never necessarily a space for us to showcase our own work. I wanted to create a space where other people could showcase theirs.
Gotcha.
And even to this day, every project that I work on, like, I take photos and I write, but I don't publish my own work really. I love publishing other people's work, and I think that with those kinds of projects, you do run into situations where you're publishing something that maybe like you don't know an immense amount about, or you have so much more learning to do. Obviously, I am like a cis white woman existing in this world. I have a very limited perspective on society and societal experiences and my personal experiences. And I think that, you know, when it comes to that, it's not necessarily about, it's about acknowledging what you don't know and finding other people who do know and who are speaking on that, and stopping and listening and learning, but then also crafting that space for them to project their voice further, because there are so many other they're an expansive world with people that do not know as much as they should or as much as they can, and creating a space that feels like a safe environment for those sort of discourses is very, very important. And also, like, going back to the idea of burnout too, like, burnout is an immense privilege to have. Especially when it comes to like the work that you and I do, which is like a lot of like conversations and a lot of
Thank you for including me in that. That's like an honor. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, what? No. I mean, because all the work that you do is about talking to people. It's about sharing people's stories. It's about, it's about reaching out to your community and building that metric of impact. And I think that, that was something where like deep guilt over burnout for a while, because it's like we've created this beautiful space and it's not mine now, it's yours. And for me to step back is me saying, okay, it isn't yours anymore, I know exactly what you mean. Felt very wrong, but then also needing to make space for your own personal health, because you can't be at your peak for others if you're not at the peak for yourself. And sort of examining a lot of the intricacies of that I think is really important. But overall, just like acknowledging that the thing that you create exists outside of you, even though you are an immense part of it and you are the reason why it sort of keeps going, you're not the entirety of it. And once you release something out into the world, for better or for worse, it doesn't belong to you anymore. A small piece always will, but in its entirety, the impact that it makes on other people is just as tangible as the impact that it makes on yourself.
Do you feel like you taking a step back has to be like a period and not a comma? Like, do you feel like when you take a step back, does the community have to come with you? Do you think there's a way to synonymously become maybe less involved for your own good, but simultaneously create an environment where this still exists through other people? Like how often do you consider like the influence you have on people and like maybe influencing others to like create their own spaces or do things like that?
I think definitely the influence on other people is extremely impactful, especially when we got that big boom off TikTok. That was also an era of time where, oh my gosh, I remember when I first made the publication and I went on and I had this whole rant that I would always go on about how, one day an online magazine is going to be just as popular and just as seen as like a YouTube channel, because I had tried to make a YouTube channel as every middle schooler does, and I hated looking at myself and I hated hearing my voice, so obviously that didn't last very long. But then, around the time where we got that big boom and COVID comes up, we did see a period of time where online magazines were popping up like nobody's business everywhere, and we were getting so many emails from people being like, how do you do this? What do you do? Blah, 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 blah. And even though we're paused, like I still check through the emails, and if there's ever something like that comes through, I mean, if someone's willing to reach out, then I'm willing to answer. And I think that, those sort of indirect touch points are always really important to keep going, and I love doing those. But I also think that it takes a lot of premeditative work to make something sustainable on its own outside of a facilitator. And unfortunately, Pure Nowhere did not exist in that way at the time, / doesn't exist in that way at the time as well. So there are elements that have been paused. There are some people that think that we don't do anything anymore just because we don't exist in the same ways as we did before, and they're not necessarily connected to our new touch points now.
Yeah, I really, really respect your ability to be able to like allow the thing that you've built to exist for other people in their own way. That's something I've been trying to get better at, defining or allowing people to define their own relationship with Pure Nowhere. Like that is really, really cool. I mean, I really respect that you're able to do that. I've tried to get better at that, and I think it comes with platforming other people. Like, it's so cool that you do that. I think it's like that to me is like a level of ego that I think I selfishly am still trying to relinquish a little bit, like being able to like allow other people, because I don't know, I'm not, I'd be interested to see if you related to this. It's like Above the Bridge to me is something so specific in my head, and it's like I want to allow other people to like express themselves through it, but it's like at times like I want to hold on to what it looks like to me, but that is entirely egotistical, entirely selfish, because who is to say what it looks like in my head is the best version of it? Just because I came up with the name doesn't mean that I know what the best version of it looks like. Do you feel like when you think of Pure Nowhere, does it feel like this big expansive vision in your head? And when you listen to how other people think of it, how often do those two visions align? Like, are they very different?
I think I am constantly surprised in the ways in which they are the same.
Wow, okay.
I perceive them in my mind as two very different things, and then I have a conversation with someone else that completely picks up on all the nuances that weren't even included in the piece.
Wow.
And that resonates through with like a lot of the newer events that we're throwing as well. Is like there's so much context and so much research and so much intention that isn't necessarily publicized. And when a stranger comes up to you after the performance and they're like, hey, like I saw this and it made me feel this way and it made me think of that, and it leads back to like a weird main inspiration in like the months ago in the very beginning. That's something immensely beautiful. And I think that, like, I don't know, I mean, the main purpose and root of Pure Nowhere for me was always publishing works that make people feel something in a very true and like vulnerable and intimate kind of way. You know what I mean? And I think that that sort of was a very accurate abstract measure to guide us forward, because that also allowed us to expand our perception of emotional impact to experiences that we didn't necessarily have, to experiences that were new, to things that to things that we hadn't necessarily been exposed to before. And I think that that also is a great unifier as well, is impact, because one thing can impact everybody in very different ways, but that emotion is still felt at the core of it, you know. And then once you have a space where you can then discuss the different variables of impact across all of these individuals, then you start to thread a very cohesive story together. You know? Yeah,
it's almost like differently lanes of the RPG, you know. It's like it's like different way. It's like one of those choose your adventure games, you know. It's like it looks like something different to everybody, but it's like there are underlying themes that align us all together with it.
Exactly. And at the root of everything that you create as an artist and as a creative, you know, storytelling and the conversations that follow that, I think, are the most important aspects of what you put into the world.
What do you think is the most important thing about storytelling?
I think the most important thing about storytelling is that the most important thing about storytelling is accessibility to storytelling, because that is an art form that has not been available to a majority of the world for most of history.
What do you mean by accessibility to storytelling?
Accessibility to storytelling, I mean, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of cultures throughout the world that have had their storytelling is... There are hundreds of thousands of cultures throughout the world that have not had the ability to carry forward their stories. And so much history that doesn't exist anymore because it wasn't allowed to exist, because people weren't allowed to speak, because people weren't allowed to share, because documentation of these things were destroyed. And I think that that's one thing that social media kind of brings forward, you know, is a wider access to storytelling, and a wider access to story consumption as well. But I think that, that's the most important aspect of anything, and acknowledging the before, the during, and the after.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah, 100%. I think that plays into just history as well.
Yeah, history is storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
That's it. And I think about that all the time, that like so much of history that we know is completely like, I don't want to say false, but I feel like if you're looking at one aspect of something, it's inherently false because there's so much more context that is lost in that realm, you know? Yeah,
there's multiple accounts to every single historical moment. I remember when I was a kid questioning like the legitimacy of like learning history in high school. Like I remember being like, this is so stupid. Like that was back then. Why do I have to learn about it? But I think as I get older and I become more in love with storytelling, it's like I realize the importance of history.
Yeah, and would you say that that's informed the way that you pursue storytelling as an individual as well?
100%.
Exactly.
I think like one of the coolest parts about like and I don't know, this might be niche to me, but I think I'm so in love with like the history of things that exist now. Like when I think about I think about like there's so many companies like this that are like, you know, adjacent to what I do that I think like Pure Nowhere being one of them that I think are so cool, and I just love the history of them. I think that's so sick. And like whether it's what you do or what any of the other people who like I think are really, really amazing what they do, I think it's so cool. There's people like around my age that have been pursuing something for like a gigantic period of their life. That to me is so cool, and thinking about like the lore and the history and all the small moments that no one knows about is super cool to me.
The small moments that no one knows about is, especially when it comes to art, because again, adding to the context, that's context that not a lot of people have, and when you get that, it feels like a little jewel, like a gift, you know, like you get like a snippet of life and what it must have been like to create that in the moment. And also, I really appreciate all the kind things that you're saying. They're making my heart very happy.
Of course,
I appreciate it.
Of course. But yeah. that's like why I love this too. It's like when I'm talking to musicians or people who work in music or are related to music, it's like there's so many things that we broadcast to the world as like creatives, right? It's like half of our job is like throwing ourselves at people. But it's interesting because like you can throw yourself at people and still never touch the intimate details of your life.
Yeah, and then that's when you can really dissect the storytelling of it. You know what I mean? How someone's maybe good at that, maybe not so. I don't say not good at that, but how there is room to get better. Yeah. And I think I don't know, I think like interdisciplinary measures for storytelling is also something that we kind of tend to overlook. You know, how many, I mean, because everybody digests information differently. You know, some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, some people are more tactile learners. How many different ways can you tell the same story? How many ways are those interpreted, and how many ways can those be brought back to the center? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then how close are all those versions to like the truth? You know?
But then is to say what is
the truth? Yeah,
because reality is completely
skewed.
Yeah, it's completely self-perceptive. I think about the fact that I will never truly know what I look like. You know?
Oh, that's so weird.
That's something where like it's like a fact. Like the longer you look at something, the more skewed your perception becomes. You look at yourself your entire life in various ways, but it's never the actual image of you. It's always a reflection or a recreation. I
interviewed somebody named Olivia like 3 years ago now. She used to go by War and Peace was her music name, and now she makes music under the name Operelli. But she has a song that I don't even know if it's available on streaming anymore, but this was years ago. But she has a song about this, about, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but like about how you truly will never be able to know what you look like, and then also how like there isn't really like a way. This sounds weird and strange and abstract, but like there isn't really a way that you look, because you look different to everybody, which is like a really, really strange thought, you know?
Precise. And I mean, that's also something too, that like you look different to everybody depending on the context in which they know you.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, I don't know, you can just sort of peel everything, you peel everything away, and at the core of, I think, almost any topic are the same foundational puzzle pieces.
Yeah,
you know?
100%. When you look at like the next like 3 to 5 years of Pure Nowhere, what do you think your track back to getting to that place where you were throwing things into the void, what does that look like for you? Do you find yourself still dreaming on it in the same way? Is your relationship with it different now? Is it, when you look at it, how does it feel? Does it feel the same as it did when you were in 8th grade?
I think I have moments where it feels the same, and those moments definitely keep me moving forward, because they're a reminder that state of creation is still possible and something that you can reconnect with. I think you say 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
Okay. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, I mean, first, we've been trying to do a website redesign for a very long time. One thing that Abby and I used to do is every 2 weeks we would completely change the website, mainly because we were always messing around with it. But that was
so cool.
One thing that people loved. That was an indirect thing. Like, we only did it for ourselves, and then people would be like, I love how every time I come back it's different. It's like a metaphor for youth and growing up. And we're like, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's totally intentional. Yeah.
We're not just indecisive, and, you know. But I think the first step is definitely just recreating a platform that feels like a productive space to throw out into the void. I think the way, I don't know, I'm a big UX UI person. If my brain doesn't like how something looks, no matter how hard I try, I can't use it. You know, no matter how intuitive it might be, if it doesn't aesthetically and structurally feel like a space that I can exist in. I could not use Google Calendar up until this past year.
Oh my God, I haven't used it till 4 days ago. It's one of my New Year's resolutions. Mario hates me for it.
I feel that, Mario.
Yeah, because I was like, I've clung to that calendar for so long, and people bully me about it. This year, I'm like, I need to use Google Calendar.
Mine is my Notion calendar, and then my to-do list notebook. Yeah. But now I have Google Calendar. Everything's much more organized.
Yeah, I definitely gotten used to it more so than I was a week ago. I'm starting to like it more and more.
Glad. Yeah. Curves, wow. Yeah. So much quicker than you realize. Bless you.
Oh, I was about to sneeze. It didn't come out though. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I think that creating almost like a portal to the void that feels productive is step 1, and then step 2 is just putting in the work, I guess. I think I know exactly what I want to publish and shift. I think that for a long time we've known, and we just haven't made the harsh decisions to cut certain aspects that we were clinging on to very deeply. And at the core of it, it's stories that don't expire with a timestamp. I also want to stop using the word content, because I feel like that puts like a value metric on the things that you create. A long time ago, Abby and I got the opportunity to interview Jefferson Hack, who's the co-founder of Dazed publication.
Cool.
And one of the things that he was talking about was, throwing out the word content and using stories instead, because stories add a more humanistic inquiry to these pieces that you're putting out into the world, and it changes the way that you inherently interact with what you're putting out. So that's something I want to try instilling a bit more, and focusing on, like I said, content that doesn't expire with a timestamp, content that is a piece not necessarily because the person is who they are, but because they have something to say.
Yeah. I love that idea. Yeah. That is very similar to the way I think about like the interviews that we do. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't want those stories to ever expire. Like, I want those stories to be like a snapshot of who that person is in that period of time.
Yeah, they always ring true.
Yeah.
And that's something where, like, I feel like in music journalism too, like every interview and music review you read is always like, stream this album out Thursday, blah blah blah, and it's only questions that are relevant in that moment before you listen to the album, versus like, I don't know, like I miss the music reviews that we would publish and somebody would write something about like a song or an album. It's already been out a couple years, but they listen to it and it is their own personal account of their connotation with that story. And I think that, we have this one piece that unfortunately never got published because we didn't end up making that print issue, but we did an interview with Arlo Parks in 2019, 2020. And that entire interview my friend V did, and not once did we ask her about her music. I love
that. That's like what I get accused of doing. Yeah.
And it was one of the most beautiful, and very selfishly, I go back to it all the time, it's one of the most beautiful interviews I'd ever read, purely because they were questions that I would never think to ask, but the root of the answers are so threaded through every reason why I love her music.
And it's also like we were talking to a musician. You can ask them any question that has nothing to do with music, and the answer is still musical. Exactly. You know what I mean?
And like, I just want to stop asking the questions. You could just go into Google and learn, it's already been asked before.
Yeah, I feel that was one of my rules when I first started doing this. It was like,
very good at it.
Thank you so much. But it was like, my goal was like, if I could watch another interview with somebody and I find a question that they've been asked, I will not under any circumstance come even close to that question. Like, if somebody could like look at you, like I want somebody to watch this and be like, I didn't know that about Kyla. Like that to me is like, because otherwise it's like, what are you doing it for?
Dude, I'm not gonna lie, a majority of the people in my life don't know anything about Pure Nowhere now.
Really?
Yeah, and I feel like that's also an interesting shift, whereas it used to be my main personality trait. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, it was something that everybody in my life was aware of because it was the only thing that I did. And now it's a chapter of time where I've realized that even like my closest friends, I've like, made a remark or told a story, and it's always like, oh my God, I didn't realize that you did that, or like, I didn't know about this, or I didn't know about that. And it feels like very disconnected, like two different universes. It feels like an alternate universe.
Since you started working at Slingshot, has that been like a newer chapter of your life? Like, do you feel like that is kind of like, there's like Pure Nowhere, and then now you're like working at Slingshot and doing all this? And also, can you explain me more? Like, I would love to get your take, or not your take, but your explanation of like what it fully is that Slingshot does, because I'm always forever trying to fully understand it, and I would love to learn more.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I do think that they do exist in my brain as two separate chapters almost. I think in the beginning they meshed together a little bit, because when I first started working for Slingshot, they brought me on. Well, this was also before it was a paying job, because it was founded by my friend, and I've been really, really grateful to be there for almost the whole process of the creation of this company. But when they brought me on, it was because they were running an online summit for musical creatives, industry professionals, to sort of answer all of these questions, and it was a really incredible thing. But they brought me on essentially to clean it all up, because it was a few weeks out and the entire thing was a mess, and I have a lot of experience in events, so they were like, Kyla, would you come help us?
We need help.
We need help, yeah, and that's exactly what I did. And
good for them for asking for help.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And I loved working with them. I think that at the root of why they do Slingshot is the same root of why I do Pure Nowhere and
cool.
why I just like exist within the world of music, but Slingshot is a company that builds builds business and financial infrastructure for artists and creatives. So essentially what that means is that we offer like a plethora of tools that independent creatives and freelancers don't really have access to or don't necessarily know how to construct for themselves.
Gotcha.
In the realms of like finance, taxes, healthcare, benefits, all of that, with the sheer goal of increasing the equity within creative spaces. And it started off in mainly just like a musical sphere. We were mainly working with musicians, but now we are working really hard to rebrand that with the expansion of any sort of creative pursuit, individual, freelancer, small business that exists within that realm, because we realize that these services are, it's something everybody has issues with, especially as a young person. Capitalism still exists in this world, so might as well try to give people the leg up if we can.
Yeah, that's so valuable. I like didn't. Yeah, I've always been trying to like comprehend exactly like what it is Slingshot does, and see it always from the outside. It seemed like so many different things, which is so cool. Which is again why why I was interested in it. I feel like things that I can't pin down or understand like from the surface level are the things that are most interesting to me. So that's really cool. I feel like that's like an idea that will be expanded upon like for years and years to come. I think like there needs to be more companies like that, and it's kind of like a new age thing too.
Definitely, and I feel like that's something we also have existed as a lot of different things, which I think also gives us a leg up in what we do, because the way that we got to this current iteration of Slingshot, which is like it is the company in its whole, we got to that point because we existed as different versions beforehand and sort of followed those threads of what was needed in these communities that we're working with. And at the heart of it, it really is just like based on community support and collective growth. And I think that that's something that's really beautiful, especially in music, because people like, I don't know, music is only an equitable industry for very select people.
Yeah. And I always say like if you want to make money, don't go into music.
Exactly. And that shouldn't be the case, because
it's a huge industry.
If a content creator can make a living off of having 100,000 followers, why can't a musician make a living off 100,000, monthly listeners?
Yeah.
And that's something that like my the boss Sunil always says, and the way that that's the thing that got me most passionate about the company is like the way that he talks about the work that we do. Wow. Because it's
like with a lot of passion.
It's with immense passion, and it's with immense passion that I see and feel reflected in myself, and it almost feels like a little like rallying cry, Wow. So everybody that we sort of bring into the community, like I run community endeavors for the company, which means that I get to work with the creatives that we work with. I talk to creatives to try and tell them about what we do, which is sometimes hard because obviously it is a product, that costs money, but at the same time it is something that like nobody on the company would be working for this organization if we didn't like wholeheartedly and truly believe that it was a necessary tool in the creative sphere.
So are you going out and finding these artists like yourself, or do they come to you? And when they come to you, like how exactly does that work? Like how do they get these resources?
Well, I mean, it's half and half. I think we are definitely being a bit selective with the community that we construct, because we want it to be the most sustainable, the most well-supported community that we possibly can. So it's not a product that's widely available for any old regular Joe out in the world. Otherwise it would kind of decrease the quality of work that we put into each thing, because but it is something where it's a little bit of half and half. So there are some people that reach out to us, but right now at this moment, it's a lot of us reaching out to the communities that we have in general. Luckily, everybody on the team already exists as a creative individual within the world themselves. We have Michael, who management company, photography, visuals, whatever, and we have Sumit. lofty sticker. And then Sumit himself is a musician, and then, you know, Lily is a designer, and Kitty is a graphic designer, and Alex is a video producer, and like everybody does something in the realms that we're reaching out towards. So it's like, you know, we are the audience that we're servicing, and we already have those connections and those friendships. And so it's really just about talking about what we do and getting other people talking about what we do, because the more people that are discussing an issue, the more impact will be made on a larger scale.
That's beautiful that it's like that small and tight knit of like a team.
Yeah.
I feel like it is very obvious that like whether it's a Slingshot or Pure Nowhere, I feel like everything, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I feel like everything that you do is like heavily with a stress on community, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's so cool. Like I feel like when the further and further we move towards this path in this industry where everything feels more separated than ever. Ironically, what will stand out the most is these communities of people together in real life, being friends, building each other's relationships, you know, physical spaces that feel like home. Like that's so cool to me.
Thank you so much.
Of course,
yeah, no,
of course.
I feel like community is the most impactful and the most like radical state of existence, you know?
Wow, yeah.
You organize and you make change, and that's how true impact happens, is by unification and not individualism.
How do you think, like, when you look forward just in your life and whatever creative endeavors it is, how do you think you can stress community to more people? Like, how do you think you can continue to grow that in whatever space you fulfill for the rest of your, like, creative endeavors?
I think that is a beautiful opportunity for hands-on experience. I think the way that you really sort of spread that mindset is by showing people what they're missing, because once they experience that, they can never unsee it, they can never unfeel it, and it's going to be something that they're aware of the absence of. And I've noticed, especially in some of my friends where that's happened, a lot of, you know, priority shifts and life shifts and beautiful ways that then move to support community over, you know, self-preservation.
It's very full circle. It's like that, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like, yeah. It's like you found that in like San Diego music scene, and then it's like now you're trying to build it. That's beautiful. Kyla, thank you very much for doing this. I love this one a lot. Very inspired by your work. It was an honor to talk to you. I appreciate it very, very much, and I'm very excited to see like whatever the next phase of your life is. But I believe in it. I believe whatever you're doing, I think you have great intentions and motives, and it's very, very, very appreciative of you sitting down with me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an immense honor. I love chatting with you always, and I'm so glad that this one has a little record, because I feel like we have these wonderful conversations, and then I'm always like, damn, I wish I could go back and listen to it again. But you will be in the next chapter of whatever exists. So thank you so much for your presence and your time. And I'm very excited to see what we create.
Thank you, 100%. Yeah. Tell them where they can find whatever endeavors you are doing, where they can follow you, look at whatever you put out next, be that Pure Nowhere, Slingshot related, whatever it is. This is where I plug everything. Plug yourself. You can find us on Instagram, Pure Nowhere, at Pure Nowhere, or purenowhere.com. My personal Instagram is Kyla Rain, KYLA.RAIN, and then Slingshot you can find on slingshot.fm on both social media and online. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me. Cheers. Cheers. Empty teacups. Oh, mine still has some. Hey, all right. Music matters.